what does Martha Ballard's story tell us about the sexual mores of Maine? And yeah, it's not going to be that spicy, okay? But if we go to the Midwives' Tale, Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's book, there's a lot of insight that we get to the status of women and their sexual existence and what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. And I think what's interesting is Martha Ballard's story is, early 1800s, right? This is the same time as Jane Austen. And there's a huge contrast between what we see in Jane Austen's society and what we see in the society in Maine. Now, look, this is paternalistic. Women are being treated as not having rights, and there's just all sorts of negatives to this. So I'm not losing sight of that. But when we look back at this time, they had some attitudes that were, beneficial to, or, they just weren't like a Jane Austen book. Now, first of all, premarital sex. This seems to have been kind of like, yeah, happens, right? It's not a big deal, right? And that's something Laurel Thatcher Ulrich brings up, that, yes, you do have this practice if a woman gives birth out of wedlock, she can be fined, and women are fined and men aren't, and there's all of that going on. And that's depicted in the Frozen River. But Laurel Thatcher Ulrich in the Midwives' Tale is saying, hey, look, yes, that's true. They were actually doing it less and less, right? So they were doing that less and less. And she points out that though this practice is paternalistic and a little stupid, the idea that if a woman names the father in childbirth to the midwife, right? She's taken, it's believed she can't lie. Now, this is seen, by the way, as being, about bringing her to court and doing, but there's another side to it that Laurel Thatcher Ulrich brings up. It's like, look, it's not a he said, she said. It's a she said it in childbirth. We don't care what you say, dude. Pay. And that, I don't know what we do with this, okay? I'm just saying that's different, and that's maybe good. I don't know. The other thing is, women who have a child out of wedlock are not ruined, right? They may have to pay a fine, but they're also going to get money, right? And so very often these women would, engage in the process and be very willing to engage in the legal process because, yes, they might get a fine, but they also have this case and they get money to raise their kid, and they go on to marry. Not necessarily, they don't just have to marry the guy who they had the kid with, right? She said that it was very common for women to go, because in that society, they weren't vilified. And in fact, they had a kid, but the kid was getting supported by this other guy, right? And so in kind of the pragmatic side of things, no, this is, it almost made them more marriable, right? If you're being, materialistic about it, right? So very different, right? There's not this stigma. Also, having a kid early in your marriage was kind of normal. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich again points out 3 of Martha Ballard's children, have, when they get married, they have kids either before or soon after they get married. So there's this idea that, hey, look, this happens. It's not as big a deal. Also, there isn't this idea of women having to be cloistered and chaperoned. Now, a lot of this, I think, is the luxury that people had of being in a small community, right? That everyone in the community, they know them. They all go to the same church, right? We're kind of an extended family. And so a woman going downtown isn't thought, there's no stranger danger because there are no freaking strangers. And, so we're not treating women like children that have to worry about stranger danger, right? And so the youngins are allowed to have frolics, right? And the idea of unmarried men and women interacting is seen as cute, right? And in Martha Ballard's diary, she talks about the kids having had a frolic and happy that they behave that way. But there's kind of this sense of like, yeah, they could misbehave, but that's okay. And we're happy that they did behave well. And so very different view of things. I think we look back through the Victorian lens, right? Because we have all that stuff in our past. And then we have that Jane Austen view of the past. and we don't recognize how complex it was and how, I mean, clearly there are things that we don't like about it, right? That we should be very critical of. But there are other aspects that we need to be aware of that were not as bad and show they kind of show how attitudes, moral people don't have to be, there's not just one way of doing it, right? And so we need to understand these things and look at them. So, like I said, I don't know what you want to make with it. It's not what you think, and I think it's very interesting.